What a lot of our listeners are hearing is that greedy property investors are hoarding properties and putting no one in them, and they're driving up prices and driving out first home buyers. What are your thoughts on that? So, my guest today is the Managing Director of JLF Group of Companies, which is one of Queensland's largest land developers. He holds a bachelor's degree in law and commerce, majoring in accounting. Probably explains a little bit of his personality. At 31 years old, he had bought, sold and developed more than 2,000 properties. He's the chairman of Toogoolawah Schools, which is a not-for-profit school for youth at risk based in Pimpama. He's the author of Bulletproof Investing. He is most famous for getting his shirt off at Christmas parties, and is also my very good friend, James Fitzgerald. Welcome to the potty.
Thank you, Lee. Thought I was going to have to introduce myself, but geez, you pumped me up there.
Mate, you better deliver.
Particularly that last bit, you know, it made me sound much more fun than I am.
Mate, there is not a Christmas party I've been at where you haven't got your shirt off and at some stage have been asked to leave.
There's not a Christmas party I've been at that hasn't happened.
So how have you been, mate? I hear you're midway through marathon prep.
I am. It's actually this Sunday as we speak. So I'm in the last sort of few days, and
yeah,
I don't know. I think you've done way more athletic stuff than me, and took it a lot more professionally serious. Yeah, and I find that the biggest challenge as you get a bit closer is managing your own expectations.
Yep.
Particularly with a marathon, because have you done a marathon?
I have only done a marathon at the back end of an Ironman, so I've done them. But I did a 180-kilometre bike ride and a 3.8k swim first.
Would be the same as the Ironman, right? And I think what people take for granted in big endurance races is it's an achievement to get to the start line.
Yeah.
Because you've got to do so much training. You've got to really test your body without blowing out or blowing up,
yep,
or getting injured or setbacks, etc. So it's an achievement in and of itself to get to the start line.
Yep.
And then it's an achievement to finish it because it's an endurance event.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can't help but also have your own expectations around a time or a PB or all those sorts of things. And I guess it's just keeping perspective around all the kind of it's an achievement just to be there.
Yep.
Achievement to finish, and then you give it your best, and ultimately you'll land where you land. It'll be a product of the preparation and the day and all that. But so that's my stage, managing expectations this week, Lee.
Yeah. So with professional sport, I don't know if a lot of people realise, but most pro athletes are plagued by anxiety. Performance anxiety, wanting to be good. So the lead up to a race for a lot of them, and I know I definitely fell into this camp, it's a really horrible experience because you place so much pressure on yourself. And there was a pro triathlete, Sarah Crowley, who I believe she's based up here. Anyway, by the by, I heard her talking once, and when she thought about racing, instead of thinking about, results and blah, 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 instead what she'd say is the racing is a celebration of my training. So I do all of this work in the dark when no one sees, the hours of pain that you go through. And then race day, it's not a stressful day. It's a day to celebrate everything that you've done. And I think when you approach the racing in that fashion, it gets rid of all the pressure, but it also means you get to enjoy it. And yeah, by the end of my pro career, racing, I didn't enjoy it. It was just stressful. Yeah.
See, I've never treated exercise that way. For me, exercise has been, and I don't know what we'll cover, but I'm sure we'll talk about how to be successful at this or that. And what I find, if you study successful people, no matter what they're successful at, what you will find is it's not so much of a study or a learning around what they do, but rather their habits. Mm-hmm. That's what you really find is the habits and maybe the way that they approach and think about things, but particularly the habits. And And what I noticed, early on in my kind of endeavour to be successful was I'd study people who were successful, and almost all of them had some sort of habit around giving themselves a healthy body to create a healthy mind. And I think in particular those who have sustained long-term success filled with kind of joy and not some of those bad habits that create an unhealthy environment, they've got a way to fit in a bit of a daily routine around health exercise. And for me, what worked for me was to go on like a 2 or 3 hour run at a slow pace where I could just get away from the smartphone, get away from the 24/7 news cycle, just have time to think and really absorb and reflect. And so that habit was something I gravitated towards and been a big part of my life. I try and fit it in. But you do it, go on a 30K run and you think, I did that was so much fun. I wouldn't mind maybe just putting a marathon in here so that I can kind of find out what I'm capable of as well. So that's where the marathon sort of sits for me, is it's that one test a year to test the mental and physical capabilities and hopefully maybe discover something that you didn't think you could do. But that's where it sits for me. You have a very different prism on that, I think. No better or worse. It's a whole nother level if you want to take it seriously as a profession. Because I think that the commitment to that is certainly not something I've been exposed to.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I don't think it's something I'd necessarily recommend. When I think about pro sport, I mean, pro sport is, for me anyway, was 98% being tired, starving, moderate eating disorder, getting grumpy at people for no reason. And then it was 2%, oh my God, just amazing. How do you do that? And, I put in all that work for the 2%. But, when I look back at it, it's like the decision I had to make was you can either do triathlon or you can do everything else. It was just sort of one or the other. But, that on-off switch, I think for me anyway, I need to find a way to moderate because every time I try and get back into sport, I go too far in and it's at the expense of everything else, where I think you make a really good point that it just needs to be a part of your life, not the only part.
It's the first hour of every day is just an hour where I have no technology on me. Ideally, I'm outside, so if I can sort of do it outside, it's ideal.
Yep.
And it's just me time for an hour. And I think, I felt Damien Hardwick, the coach of Richmond and the Gold Coast Suns, I heard him once sort of put it really well, where he said, look, habits are important to him as well, but he always found if he could get some good habits at the start of his day, the outcome of his day, could only go so far in terms of if things didn't go his way, well, at least he'd had that first 2 or 3 things that he did in the day that were going to set him up to have a good day regardless. Yeah. And that's how I see that. That first hour might be exercise. For me, I got a little 1-year-old, so I like to spend the next hour, with him, so to speak. And then if I can spend an hour kind of having a chat to someone or learning something on a podcast or a book, I'm sort of thinking, geez, I've fit a lot into the first few hours. It's already a great day.
Yeah.
And yes, my work day or things in my personal life might go any which way from here. But ultimately, it can't be that bad a day if I've been able to fit in those 3 things, which are totally within my control, which comes back to the habits. And I think it's a really important thing that it's hard to sort of build habits, but once you can build them, they're so essential, I think, for sustained success and growth and all the things that people want and crave in their life.
Well, we've all got habits, right? It's just whether they're good ones or bad ones.
Yes.
Your habit might be the first hour running, or it might be the first hour scrolling TikTok.
Yes, yes.
But we're all doing things that we're doing consistently. So, why wouldn't you do something good? And I totally get it. Like getting up, getting all of that stuff done, and then you get into work, and some people woke up half an hour ago, and you're like, I've completely won the day, and you're still having your first coffee.
Exactly right. And I think too, like, I'm obsessed with the science of habits. I find it a really peculiar sort of thing, how we do build habits.
Yep.
Because our lives are the sum of our habits in many ways. And you see that particularly in older people, like they're so habitual and they're deeply ingrained habits. And there's a great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm sure you've come across it. He actually talks about the fact that you can't get rid of a habit. You can only replace it.
Yep.
It's impossible to stop a habit. You can merely replace it with another habit, hopefully more productive and healthier.
All right, so you have it, you get up, you have an hour no screen time, go for a run, spend some time with the little one. Do you have any other habits that you're doing on a daily basis, or are they the main ones?
Yeah, no, I think probably the biggest habit, the most productive habit, I'll say, in terms of the impact to me personally is mentorship, broadly and vaguely, but to maybe just, if I can take a minute, just to give a bit of background for the listener. So I was born and raised on the Gold Coast, one of three. I'm the older brother. Yeah, that'll
the responsible
put a certain definition to who I might be as a person. But it's often funny how you ask people about themselves, and if they're oldest, youngest, middle, you get a feel for the personality already.
Yeah. So I'm an only child, and to a T, every person looks at me. Yeah, they go, spoiled then. Yes, spoiled, but also had the responsibility for everything too.
Yeah. So I was the oldest, and growing up had awesome lifestyle. Grew up on the Gold Coast, which you live here today. It's unreal. Left the Gold Coast, finished school, went and studied law and accounting. Was working as a lawyer when 14 years ago now, when I was 21. I was in litigation.
Yeah.
And litigation is suing people or defending someone who's being sued.
Yeah.
And it was a really exciting part of the law, but it was unfulfilling in real life to me because often things would get settled. So you'd do all this work, you'd be there wanting your day in court to see if you win or lose.
Yeah.
And it'd get settled. And so it was sort of like the gratification just wasn't there. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that well at the time, but I was just feeling a little bit unfulfilled. And my dad's brother, John, who you know, he's a entrepreneur, really successful property investor. 14 years ago said, would you like to come and do a couple of weeks work experience?
Yeah.
And so I went and did that 14 years ago. And I just never left. I'm still there running that company today. And what I was exposed to, it was almost jarring in many ways. It was a complete contrast to the upbringing that I'd had. My mum and dad owned businesses, rode the roller coaster of being broke 3 times, gambling debts, all sorts of the roller coaster. So in many ways, I'd seen debt risk as 4-letter words to be avoided in many ways. And then here I was exposed to my Uncle John, who was a sort of self-made millionaire, and he mentored me. And for me, that habit of, number one, seeking out a mentor, but number two, surrendering a little bit to that mentor as well, because you sort of, in many ways, you've got to unlearn some of the things that you habitually know and just surrender on the basis that if I've picked the right mentor and it's someone who's successful at what they do, shares my values, is willing enough to kind of take me on the journey, I've got to surrender myself a little bit to them. And so my habit has been, since that 14 years, is to find mentors, particularly if I'm wanting to do something that I haven't done.
How do you find them?
How do you find them? I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? How do you find a mentor? I think, there's a saying that goes, when the student is ready, the master will appear. And I think sometimes it's just making a conscious decision of, I want to learn to do this. Yeah. And you might reach out to people in your circle, ask if they know anyone who's done this before. Use the example of a marathon, right? I want to run a marathon. So you say, well, okay, my first port of call is I need to go and speak to someone who's done a bunch of marathons and done them well and continues to do them. that to me is like they're my mentor. That's who I want to speak to.
Yeah.
So, you reach out, and I would say 5-6 years ago, I might have reached out to you in the first instance. You put me onto a plan that someone came up with. I then connected with someone else who'd done, and, you eventually sort of say, well, okay, I've now found someone who has done a marathon, done many marathons, and what they're going to teach me is to avoid some of the missteps that I would make if I tried to do it myself.
Yeah, for sure.
And so a mentor ultimately is the best habit I think you can have, is to try and go for the who, not the how, in many ways, in terms of, I want to do this, rather than thinking, well, how can I do it? Well, no. Who has done that? Who can teach me how to do it? Because that's fast track to success.
So we had Daryl Bright, who was on the potty the other week, and he works for Koloshi, which is a high-end real estate agent. So he deals with a lot of wealthy people, and he gave this bit of advice which I thought was unreal. Where I'm like, if you were to give a first home buyer a bit of advice, what would it be? And he said, I deal with all of these wealthy people. All of them are really intelligent, could do all of this themselves, but they employ other people for it. So like, I could spend 20 years becoming an expert in this, or I could talk to you who's already done it. So why wouldn't I outsource that so I can focus on what I'm best at what I'm best at doing.
Yeah. And I think too, that's somewhat of a misconception about successful people, perhaps, is we put successful people on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And we often, the better story is that they've done it all themselves. But if you study successful people, and I would say the more successful someone is, and I am fortunate, I've bought, thousands, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 blocks of land over the years off public companies, but private billionaires and such as well. And anyone who's successful, I guarantee you there's a team around them. They've normally got like 3 or 4 really, really key people who've been with them a long time. And all of them, have people that they seek for advice and mentorship. It's the old Kobe Bryant sort of saying that, Kobe Bryant's a basketball player, for those not familiar. And Kobe Bryant won maybe 5 or 6 championships, a bunch of MVPs, and would often get compared to Michael Jordan. And they'd say, does it ever irritate you, Kobe, that people compare you and Michael? Do you think, maybe you had a more challenging era than Michael and therefore your achievements are more accomplished? And he said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever been asked. He said, honestly, what you guys don't understand is I am who I am because of Michael.
Yeah.
He said, when I started out, Michael was at the top of the top. I rang Michael as often as he would answer the phone and asked him for advice. He said, so I'm only what I am because of Michael. So there is no me if Michael didn't come before me. So it's just a silly thing to try and even do, because I couldn't have done what I've done without Michael. So, and ultimately that is the case for anyone who's successful, is they've done it with people supporting them and someone ultimately mentoring them as well.
So I think a couple of things that I really resonate with what you're saying is, if you want something, so say you want to be wealthy, for example's sake, find someone who has what you want. And if you find the person who has what you want, if you do what they do, you will end up with something approximating what they have. And it's my great belief in life that obviously there's differences between people, but fundamentally, you and I are exactly the same. And if you have something that I aspire to, it's not that you're better than me, it's just that you're doing something that I am either not doing or not prepared to do. And if I can shift that, my belief is that, you're not going to end up with exactly the same thing because we're all different, but it will be in the ballpark.
It doesn't mean it's easy though.
For sure.
And I was driving in on my way, and I was thinking back to when I bought my first home, and I wrote about it in Bulletproof Investing, and it was like one of the most excruciating things I've ever done, and I cringe even looking back at it, because it was 14 years ago, and
how old were you?
I'll give you a bit of context. So I'm 34 today, so I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
I was earning about $50,000 at the time, had a $40,000 personal debt accruing at 10 or 11% per annum.
Yeah, right.
And my uncle sat me down in one of the first kind of... I'd done the work experience and had subsequently stayed on and ultimately said to him, look, I'm interested in learning a bit about what you guys do. So I'd certainly not made a decision to work there long term. It was just a next stop at the time. And he sat me down and he looked me straight in the eyes and said, what do you want? And that is a very hard question to answer at any stage in your life, but particularly as a 20-year-old who had just finished university. And what did I want is just to kind of have fun, really. Like that was really it. And so I didn't have an answer. He sent me away to think about it. And I came back and I came up with some rubbish answer like, I want to be a millionaire, or, I want to be rich.
Yeah.
I probably thought that's what he's going to want to hear.
Yeah.
And he laughed and just said, that is just such a bad answer. he said, it has no meaning. Like, what does it mean to be a millionaire, to be rich? He said, how does that change your life?
Yeah.
He said, think about it this way. What don't you want? Fast forward 10 years from now, what don't you want? And so I went away and I gave it some thought, and it was a little bit easier for me to answer the question that way. And what I didn't want is I thought, look, I'm sharing a house at the moment. That's fine when I'm 20, but when I'm 30, I probably want my own place. And I'd like to not have to worry about money. That to me was something probably subconsciously that was important, because I'd seen mum and dad worry about money growing up. So I thought, if that's the thing, I just don't want to have to worry about money. And so I went back in and gave him that answer, and he said, look, a bit better. He said, it needs a bit of work, but like, what would it mean to not worry about money? I said, well, I guess as a starting point, it'd be my own place, with no debt. Like, to me, that's the ultimate symbol of not having to worry. I've got a roof over my head and I own it all. He said, great, that's your goal. But then he said, so how much is that house going to cost? How much have you saved? All these sorts of things. And I was like, no, mate, I earn $50,000 a year. Yeah. I have $40,000 personal debt. That is like ages away. I might do that when I'm 29, like the year before I'm 30. Yeah. And it was again that surrendering to the mentorship, because he just said to me, no, that's just not true. You're lying to yourself. You can buy a house tomorrow. I was like, no, I can't. And it just felt impossible, because I'd been taught to think a certain way, and ultimately there's two hemispheres to the brain, right? There's the right side of the brain, which is the creative, the unbound part of our brains. My 1-year-old, all right brain. Everything's possible. He can do anything. And then what happens is, as we get older, we learn things, we have experiences, we have failures, and our left side of the brain, we have to build this rational side of our brain, but it becomes a little bit self-limiting in the process, because we only seek to do things that are realistic and possible. We put a cap on ourselves. And so what I didn't see at the time is, I said, I don't have the money for I don't have the money for a home. Yeah. He said, the bank will give you money. I said, I don't have the deposit. He said, I'll give you the deposit. And it was like, I don't have an answer. I'm out. How am I going to pay you back the deposit? He's like, I'll charge you interest. And I was like, then all of a sudden it's the debt, it's the risk, it's the fear, it's just the kind of suffocating paranoia of everything that could go wrong.
Yeah, getting in the way of your potential success. And this is like, it's the biggest issue that I see with first home buyers, is it's not that it can't be done. It's just that there's some mental block where, this is for another time, this is for other people. But when you actually make it possible, all the fear that comes up is paralyzing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, carry on, sir.
Well, and ultimately it was sort of like it was the way that he thought that ultimately I learned. So he would say, well, how much can you borrow today? I didn't know the answer. He said, well, go find that out. Go talk to a broker or a banker and figure out what you can borrow. So I come back, I can borrow this. All right, well, how much would you need to earn to be able to borrow this amount, which would probably be enough to get you going? I don't know. Well, didn't you ask that when you met him? No, I didn't think to ask that. It's what mentors teach us, right? Is we sometimes don't know what we don't know. So we don't know to ask certain questions. So where I sort of ultimately landed is I ended up about a year after that, and 4 cancelled contracts later. 4 cancelled contracts of nothing to do with whether I could get finance, just my own fear and analysis paralysis.
So you signed up for properties and then pulled out. Yep.
And 4 properties, or 4 goes later, and 12 months later, I ended up buying my first home, which was a $300,000 home.
Yeah.
Now again, this was actually really interesting thought for men coming in. When I bought my first home, there was a first homeowners grant that was bigger for established homes than new homes.
Really?
Bizarre quirk of the time.
Yeah.
So you got about a $10,000 first homeowners grant to buy an established home, and then you didn't have to pay stamp duty. So that was sort of what I was dealing with, which stamp duty would have been about $5,000 give or take. So you were getting on a $300,000 home, $15,000, which is free money. Like, you never have to pay that back. It's and so to me, it was not negotiable whether I bought my first home with or without the first homeowners grant, because I only ever get one shot to do that. I borrowed 90%, so $300,000. Borrowed, 265. That meant that there was $45,000 left, right? So $300,000 plus the cost, $310 with mortgage insurance. Borrowed $265. That left $45,000. $15,000 as a first homeowners grant, and then John lent me the $30,000. And by the 4th time, I'd become so nervous about having interest on so much money. He said, I'm not going to charge you interest. He said, what I'll do instead is I will take 25% of whatever that property goes up in value. And for me, that was what I needed to have the confidence to do it. And so I put in no money. I had $10,000 saved. I'd cleared my personal loan. I'd increased my income, all that sort of thing. And had $10,000 that I then put into the property to tidy it up, because it was an older home. So
how'd you clear your personal loan?
A budget.
Yep.
And it was again so I read a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. It's like a tiny book, about 80, 90 pages.
I know it.
And I would say, and no disrespect, but I would say that The Barefoot Investor took The Richest Man in Babylon and put an Aussie vernacular and humour to it, because it's basically the same thing. So The Richest Man in Babylon was written in 1926, I think. So it's a very old book.
Yeah, pretty fantastic principles, but tough reading. Like, there's lots of these and thous, and
it's 80 pages, but it does take you a couple of minutes to get through a page. Yeah, because you're trying to understand the language of the time.
Yep.
Basic concept: as you get paid, whatever money lands in your bank account, put 10% into another bank account. So pay yourself first was the basic premise.
Yep.
And then figure out what you need. So your basic needs around a roof over your head, your electricity, all that sort of thing. And then figure out what you then might want. And basically, whatever's left over is what you can spend. So you've sent 10% to yourself. I was sort of probably more unreliable than most. So I had to send my 10% to a bank account that I didn't have a card or an internet banking for. I literally had to go to the branch to draw out the money.
Yeah.
And why that was good was I couldn't draw out that money after 6 o'clock. Basically.
After 6 o'clock and 6 beers.
Yes. So 6 beers, James, was
his top off, wanted the cash.
And there was a few false starts. Let's put it that way. It started out as, I bank with Commonwealth Bank on one of those Dolomites. So I still got the same savings account from when I was a 5-year-old.
Greatest marketing ploy of all time.
And I had a separate CBA account. Yeah. So that took me all of 30 seconds to transfer money from my savings into my everyday to go and put over the bar on a Saturday night. So I needed it in a totally different banking institution, no card. It was like such a thing to not get a card or internet banking.
Yep.
Like setting up the bank account, that they almost like made me sign all this paperwork to say that I agreed to not have a card and internet banking. Like it was just such an exercise. And I just had a budget where, in the end I was saving about 20% of every after-tax dollar that I earned.
So this concept, I read that book. And it was one of the fundamentals to me changing my life. And I was similar situation. I would have been about 40 grand in the hole as well. And that principle of pay yourself first changed my life. So what I did was I looked at what I earned, and I was pay-as-you-go employee, so I was getting taxed. But what I did was I went, right, all of that money is mine. So if I'm earning, we'll just say $1,000 a week, and then I'm getting taxed 300, so my take home 700, just making things up.
Yeah.
Instead of going, well, I'll keep 10% of the 700, I said, I'll keep 10% of the 1,000 because I've earned all of that.
Yeah.
And then where that ended up was I'm like, well, this $300 tax, that's my money too. Why am I forking all of this over? Which then got me going, well, that's what led me to investment properties and, reducing tax and rada. But the principle of pay yourself first was a game changer. Because I think what most people I know, and certainly what I did, was you pay everything else, and then if there's a little bit left over, you keep that.
Yes.
But the problem is, as life goes on, you earn more, and you get lifestyle creep. And, once you start getting something that's a little bit nice, you don't want to give that up.
Yeah, true. And I think the second principle in that book is to get your money working for you as well. So, it's one thing to send the money there, and that's a really good starting point. But then ultimately, you've got to get the money working for you as well. And why I ended up buying my first home is I realised that I couldn't save enough money to keep up with house prices at the time.
Yeah.
So yes, it's important to save, but then get the money working as well, so that at the very least you can sort of keep pace with the changing value of assets and goods and all that sort of thing. Because having that money sitting in the bank was really good starting point, and then it kind of just had to evolve from there. Spending on what you need as well, like that's hard to do.
Yeah.
We confuse our needs with our wants, don't you find?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And the more you earn, the more you, like, I have to have this. You don't really have to have it. You want it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your needs shift a bit over time as well. You have, you got to live. You got to live. But certainly I think having a real clear distinction between what you need and what you want is really, really important sort of exercise to go to. And I just find it's the good old-fashioned way of just going through bank statements and looking at where your money goes.
Yeah, my dad, when I was young, said to me, he said, you either work hard now or you'll work hard for the rest of your life. And I applied that principle to a lot of things. And with saving and being frugal, if you work hard now with your savings, set yourself up, get into a house, maybe get an investment property, that's hard work in the short term where you're needing to make compromises. But in the long term, life becomes so much easier. Or you can just work hard the whole way through.
I just don't think working hard is a fallacy. And what I mean by that is it's just not enough. Like, it does not work in Australia to work hard, pay your taxes, pay off your home, and hope there's enough left over. Like, we unfortunately, and I think our generation will be the last probably, or the first rather, to encounter that you won't be guaranteed a pension.
Yep.
So you're going to have to take matters into your own hands. And your own home will be a big way to do that. That's where most Australians have their wealth tied up. 56%-ish of people's wealth is tied up in their home. And it's the only way you can make money in Australia and not pay tax. So that's a great thing. But I think you know, we have a situation where the pension is $30,000 a year at the moment, and it's the most. That's either not a lot or it might be a lot, depending on how you view the world and what your lifestyle is that you're accustomed to. It's one of the more generous pensions in the developed world. You get it when you're 67. Mm-hmm. The issue is that we've got an ageing population. We've gone from 7 Australians for every one pensioner to 3.5 working Australians, that is, to 3.5. So the number's halved. And if you've got less taxpayers for the people who need the pension and the healthcare system, something's got to give eventually. And I think at some point the government will have to say, well, we can't have people living in unencumbered homes, debt-free, worth millions of dollars, who are getting the pension. We've got to put their home into the eligibility test.
Yeah.
So I think our generation has to take matters into our own hands and find a level of financial literacy to at the very least kind of get some sort of buffer and degree of independence financially by the time we retire.
Do you think it would be fair to say that financial literacy isn't really taught as a standard?
Absolutely.
So you were, again, would it be fair to say, like, you were pretty lucky that you had John, and John is very successful, but he also gives away the information. Like, he's a teacher, he likes to teach people, and you sorted out, and he was prepared to kind of take you under the wing and build you up. Not to say that you didn't work very hard for it, but you had the path with John.
Absolutely.
So if you've got, for a person who doesn't have the literacy, where they sit there and go, hey, I've got no idea what I'm doing, but they don't have an Uncle John to go to, where would you go? I guess we're coming back to the conversation before where you go, right.
I think like anything, you start with like a family member, right? If you don't have a family member, you maybe go to a friend. And if you don't have a family member or a friend, you seek out a professional. That's sort of the way to go about it. And that would be the same, you know, whether you're running a marathon and you have a family member, you don't have a family member, you don't have a friend, so you join a run club or something like that. It's really no different that you seek out someone who knows what they're doing and has done it, because ultimately I think it's a false economy to do it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I've never seen anyone who's in the top 1% of what they do who's done it themselves.
Yeah, everyone gets taught. Everyone gets helped somewhere along the line.
The more successful people do. I think they fast-track their success by sort of doing that, yeah. So family member, friend, or a professional, that's sort of the starting point for mine.
All right, so circling back around, we get rid of the debt by doing a budget, sticking to it. You get some very generous help from a family member, which gives you the deposit, even though you gave up 25% of your house uplift. But hey, what a deal, right? You got into a home. It's money that you wouldn't have had.
3/4 of one, better than all of none. And for me, it was, you know, I could have just paid him an interest on that money, and he, you know, I think that's what often people take for granted is there's a lot of people who have money and can't do anything with that money. You know, so I think, you know, money's like a bit of a taboo subject in many ways. I've always found that there's always someone who's got money, and if there's a good enough opportunity or a good enough person who's worth backing, they will make it happen. Obviously, you know, you shouldn't expect a free ride or anything like that. But, you know, a lot of people think that money is, you know, not having, say, a deposit or not having the money is the end of the game in terms of getting started. I could not disagree more that there is always a way, particularly if you're willing to do it on a fair, at arm's length basis, you know, where there's a win-win for you and whoever that person might be.
Yeah. I've got a friend in the US, and not to put the US on a pedestal because they've got a whole heap of their own problems, but she said to me, you know, it's really interesting here in Australia. She's like, if you're doing well and you tell people you're doing well, they get angry at you. They're like, what, you're better than me now? and there's this tall poppy where people try and cut each other down, which said it's very different in the US. She said, if you're doing well, people are like, that's incredible. How did you do it? Teach me, help me. Just a sort of a different mentality towards money.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, from John's perspective too, he made me sign an agreement. So I had to sign a full-on legal document. Yeah. Which, again, I advocate for. I did something later, in later years with my mum, and we did the same. It's just a good thing, I think, for as a practice to have a real clear idea of what each other is doing and getting out of something. So he made me sign an agreement, and for him, $30,000, not a lot of money, probably was just sitting in a bank account, earning him, you know, a few percent or two. And he put that $30,000 in 2 years later. So I'd done a tidy up of a kitchen and a bathroom, and 2 years later, a bit of growth in the market meant that the property went from $300,000 to $340,000. I then got that revalued and could take my loan up to 90% of the new value. Yeah, and that gave me about $40,000, which I could pay out John. His $30,000 initial investment, plus it had gone from 300 to 340, so 10,000 of that was his, 25%. So he turned 30,000 into 40,000 in 2 years, which he probably wasn't going to do with the money sitting in the bank. He definitely wasn't going to do with the money sitting in the bank. Yeah. So it was a win-win, you know. And then that got me started, and you know, from there I was sort of able to do things on my own, and you know, and sort of had the head start that I otherwise wouldn't have had. But it wasn't a free ride. Yes, I was very lucky that I had him. I think I was more lucky for his mentorship, but yes, lucky that he gave me the deposit. But you know, he paid. I paid effectively. What's that? 10,000 on 30,000. That's about 16% a year. Yeah. So it's expensive money.
Sure, but I think a good point that you make where the mentorship was more valuable, because if we think back over this story, like 90% of that story was pushing you through self-imposed barriers and fears, and 10% of it was just the mechanics of how do I actually do it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So bought that house by yourself, no partner, or with a partner?
Yeah, no partner, no partner.
Do you remember the first time you walked into that house as the owner?
Yeah, distinctly. So I had to live in it for 6 months. That's the rule on the first homeowners grant. It's still the rule, I think. 6 months. So yeah, I was living out there. I got some roommates in. I don't know if I know you're not supposed to do that, but I just got some roommates in to pay some cash. Yeah. You know, $100 here or there. And yeah, I remember it was a little bit daunting. You know, it was a 4-bedroom home, so it's a big home. Yeah. I was used to sharing a home. Yeah. And yeah, it was daunting. Somewhat fulfilling. It's your own, but it was a little bit daunting as well.
When you first, like the actual moment when you first walked in, do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Were you on your own or were you with someone?
I was... So, I mean, I first walked in before I owned it, and I was with the agent at the time, yeah.
And then when you walked in as the owner?
I was with a builder.
You were with the builder? With a builder?
Well, it needed work. Yeah, it needed. It was an older home, which... Again, it was very... I'm not sure why the state government were incentivising older homes at the time. Must have been I couldn't really tell you. It's not really my go, but
because they only do it on new homes now.
I think the justification for it is it generates new housing, which makes sense.
And it stimulates the economy. So yes, the government pays out, you know, up here 30 grand, in Melbourne 10 grand. Yeah. But the tax revenue that comes back via, you know, building trade, blah blah blah, that's you know, just a big merry-go-round of money for them.
Yeah, but so a little bit sort of, right, the kitchen needs a bit of work, the bathroom needs a bit of work. So yeah, it was a bit of a you know, the work to be done was probably my mindset at the time. Yep. When I was in there, I mean, I can distinctly remember when those kitchens and bathrooms were tidied up. Then it was like, yeah, this is my home. I own this.
Yeah.
Well, bank owns a big chunk, but I own it. Yeah.
Yeah, can do what you want.
Yeah. Hang up photos, change the landscaping, all those sorts of things.
Do you still own that property?
Yep.
All right, so you bought it for 300 in
2011.
Do you mind me asking how much it's worth now?
Yeah, it's worth probably 700,000. Rented out for 600, so it's done really well.
Yeah, really well. 400 grand.
Have not had a single day after I moved out that it hasn't had a tenant.
Congratulations, mate.
Which is your biggest fear as a investor on the investor side, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, look, as any tenant will tell you at the moment, like it's bedlam out there. It's very difficult.
Yeah. But that cycles a bit as well.
Yeah.
Everything cycles in life.
So definitely want to talk a little bit about the property cycles and obviously you're a developer, so you'll have some really good insight for our clients. But before we move on from this point, just one other question that I wanted to ask you, because you were mentored by a family member, which I think has pros and cons. I don't think that road necessarily would have been all easy. So what are the best things you've got out of it, or the best lessons, and then what has been the toughest bit of that journey for you?
So I mean, the best part is the success that came from it. These days my wife and I have got 8 properties plus our own home. So
You've got 8 properties.
8 property, and I'll never worry about money for the rest of my life. So that's fulfilling.
A little bit of a mic drop moment. Yeah, 8 properties.
Well, financial independence, right? That's the best part of I'm independent financially.
But more importantly to me, when you sat down with John and John pushed you on what you wanted, and you said, I want to be financially independent,
Yep.
and now you're 14 years down the track, and you have that, and that is incredible.
And I don't think I fully got everything that he was telling me. So his big thing is compound growth. It's like everything. The secret sauce. He calls it repetition. It's just like he always says success is repetition.
Yep.
That's his mantra daily. And I think that compound growth is something you learn in school, but you probably don't grasp the benefit of. And I always love to tell the story. If you took 30 steps and the step was a meter every time, you go 30 meters. Mm-hmm. If you take 30 compound steps, which means the first meter is a meter, and let's say it's compounding into a neat 2 and then 4, and it's doubling every time. Your 30 steps takes you around the world 13 times. Like, it's a phenomenal difference between 30 basic simple steps and 30 compound steps. And the concept around investing is you buy, hold, use the kind of growth to then buy more. And as you've got properties that you've owned for a long period of time, the growth gets more and more later in the years. But also as you own multiple properties, the growth becomes more and more because you've got multiple properties growing. Basic concept, I don't think I fully got that until I bought probably my 4th property and was 6, 7 years down the track of being guided by John. I would say I had to almost surrender to the method and the advice for the first 5 or 6 years.
Okay, let's compound growth is what I want to talk about. But before we get to that, what has been the hardest thing about being mentored by John, mentored by a family member, something in that?
I think, like, in terms of being mentored, you're pushed out of your comfort zone. So you're very uncomfortable for the first little while. You're constantly uncomfortable because they're seeing often a potential in you that you don't see yourself. Mm-hmm. And so therefore you're challenged by that because it feels uncomfortable to stretch.
Yeah.
So that's the most uncomfortable part. And I think because he's a family member and because I've known him so long, he has a deep understanding of my vulnerabilities, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Particularly around my dad broke 3 times, gambler. He knows all that. And so therefore he knows intimately my reservations and fear. My deepest and darkest fear is that I'll lose control, or that I'll take a risk that's a too big a risk, or I won't properly manage a risk.
So talking about compound growth, and we're talking about compound growth and property investors. So most of the people who listen to this podcast is my mum, my dad. No. Most of the people who listen to this podcast are first home buyers.
Yes.
So what a lot of our listeners are hearing is that greedy property investors are hoarding properties and putting no one in them, and they're driving up prices and driving out first home buyers. What are your thoughts on that?
So I've got 2 thoughts. Number one is there's about 11 million homes in Australia, and 1 in 3 is owned by a property investor.
Okay.
So there's about, give or take, 3.5 million homes. Mm-hmm. Of that, 70-75% of property investors only own one. More than half earn less than $100,000 a year. So this misconception that it's the wealthy, baby boomers hoarding properties is very much removed from truth and reality. Most common professions for property investors is teachers, policemen, nurses, accountants, paramedics. They're just kind of everyday workers.
Where do you get that from? Like if I was sitting at home going, oh, you say that.
The ATO, they publish it every year.
Do they?
Yeah. So, so I think it's a misconception that your wealthy baby boomer is hoarding property.
Why then, if that's true? Sorry to cut you off. If that's true, why is this particular member of parliament pushing that message so hard?
I think number one, I actually really like the message because I think it puts it front and center that housing affordability is really important. Probably the wrong solution, right problem, wrong solution.
I agree with
ultimately, it comes down to supply demand. It's not an overly complex thing in terms of what drives house prices. You've got, if you are building enough new housing to match the population growth and demand, then house prices generally more or less stay flat or in line with inflation. So what happens though is we never build enough homes. Like that's the fundamental problem. So
why don't we build enough homes?
That's a really complex thing to answer because there is so much involved in building a new home. Mm-hmm. You've got to get the planning approvals from government bodies. You've then got to get the funding from financiers. Buyers have got to be able to get funding. You've then got to have builders and availability of trades. And I think in Australia, we've sort of shown that we can build about 200,000 houses a year, maximum. Right now, we're building 150,000. So we're down because there's a lot of infrastructure projects, which takes away some of the building talent that would otherwise be building homes. And so we're capped out at about 150,000. So your solution is you need about 1 new home for every 2 people. Mm-hmm. So 150,000 homes could house, 300,000 people. We grew by 600,000 last year. So it's a fairly basic situation where if you want house prices to be flat, bring enough people in and grow the population by the amount that we can build housing for, or deal with the ramifications.
What do you think about the Liberal government, I believe it is, saying we're going to cap migration? Do you think that or limit migration? Do you think that's going to help?
Oh, I think, sure, limit migration. I think probably the bigger help is making it a bit easier for people to build. Mm-hmm. And, I've never understood minimum lot size, right? It just defies logic. We started out as a country building terraced homes, 150, 200 square metre blocks of land with a home on it. You see them in Richmond, in Melbourne, Paddington, in Sydney, in Brisbane. Where I live, it's Hurst and West End, Paddington, Brisbane version. And then we went to these quarter-acre blocks, and then, average lot size in Brisbane today, about 500 square metres. You can't subdivide a block of land below 450 square metres in Brisbane, right? Now, that makes no sense to me. 450 square metres is a big block of land. There's 1 million homes in Brisbane. If you made that 200 square metres today, you could unlock so many more houses. I'm not saying it'd be 1 million more, but it'd be certainly enough to solve the housing crisis. So the solution ultimately will be density. We have to live in smaller spaces to keep our housing affordable. It's no different to any other country in the developed world. We are a young country. There are many countries who've dealt with affordability issues, and the solution has been to put more people in apartments and townhomes and build smaller blocks of land. Density is the solution to affordability. We'll figure that out eventually. But for now, we're sort of in that real messy halfway spot where we've got house prices and rents a little bit out of control. I think they'll figure it all out eventually, and that's where we go, is more people living in smaller spaces that are comfortable and affordable.
What would you say, so a common thing that first home buyers say is they're like, I'm going to wait for the property to crash. Property market's a bubble, it's too expensive, it's unsustainable, I'm going to wait for it to crash.
Oh, look, I think there's only truth in numbers, right? Like that's a famous old saying that we can tell stories and write stories, and ultimately there's a bit of grey and embellishment in any story that we tell. But numbers, they don't lie. You say to me you're healthy, great. There's a degree of truth for sure. You tell me you've got a blood cholesterol rating of under 200, resting heart rate under 50, then that's beyond doubt. You are healthy. There's absolute truth there. And I think the same is, with real estate and property, understanding kind of what ultimately happens, and the reality is house prices can go up and down. Land prices don't, because land is in finite supply. With as a population grows, the demand increases and the value of that land increases. I think certainly there can be a level of timing the market and booms and busts and all that if you are focused on what's built on top of that land. But if you just buy land, it's impossible for you to lose money and for that land not to increase in value. It's just impossible. So I think for those people, I would say if you are worried about that, remove the risk by just buying a block of land, building a house. Because the numbers suggest that you will have to make money. You will have to not lose money at the very least.
On the land is finite comment, looking for the right word there.
Fact.
So we say land is finite, but I drive out the back of Pimpama where there's no land and I see paddocks for days. I drive out to Ripley where it's hard to get a block at the moment. I'm like, but there is land everywhere.
Yeah.
We have so much land in this country and so few people, albeit that, half the country's desert, I get that.
Yep.
But it just seems like there's a lot of land. Why are we saying there's no land?
Well, the reason is that you need infrastructure to accompany it. So I don't know about you, but I'm not going to live anywhere unless I've got a toilet that can flush and I don't have to get rid of what comes out of it. That's called your sewer. I need power.
Yep.
I need internet. I need water to drink. And I need a road and rail and somewhere to get me to a job. So without all of that infrastructure, we can't live anywhere. That infrastructure is extremely expensive to build. And so, yes, we can keep going out to the land, but if we can only go as far as we can build the infrastructure. And I think that's again, coming back to it, that's ultimately what we will figure out, is to build more near existing infrastructure is a lot cheaper, easier, effective than trying to continually build further and further away from town and build this new infrastructure. Because we're already seeing at the moment places like Ripley, Ipswich City Council, who look after that area, they're saying, well, our sewer and water and electricity and all that costs a lot of money to not only build but maintain. We will only let you build your land development there if you can put more blocks of land into your development. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing this shrinking sizes of blocks of land, not just because of affordability pressures, but because they're just a business like everyone else who has to provide an infrastructure and a service for a price that's affordable. And the more people per square kilometre, the more affordable they can provide it, the more feasible it is.
Conscious that you need to get going in a tick, so I'll give you 2 more questions and we'll wrap this puppy up. So the first question is just talking about block sizes. So we talk to a lot of first home buyers who you say a 200 square metre block and they go, absolutely not. Like I want a 600 square metre block in blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But it's out of their price range. What would you say to those people?
I would say, look, you always have to work backwards from, getting something that you can afford today. And that's whether it's driven by borrowings, whether it's driven by deposit, whether it's driven by repayments and cash flow. And I think, you're better being in the market than out. Mm-hmm. Because a rising tide catches all boats. And ultimately, by being out of the market, your dollar is worth less and less and less, in terms of what the values of property are doing. And I think, too, my advice would be, we will not be building anything above 300 square metres in 10 years' time. Like, it just won't happen. Trust me. And I guarantee you will see 80 square metre blocks very, very soon. We're seeing them in Perth already. We've seen them, I went over to LA 10 years ago now, mm-hmm. and they were building 80 square metre blocks everywhere in Orange County as a way to keep housing affordable and also to justify the new infrastructure. So it's already happened overseas where an 80 square metre block is fairly common. It hasn't really hit Australia yet. You'll see it up at like Fitzgibbon in North Brisbane as a bit of a pilot. You're seeing it in some pilots here and there. But 200 square metre block, if that's what you can afford, you will do very well out of that. And that block will be probably the average size block in 10 years' time anyway.
If you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring first home buyer, what would it be?
Mentor, friend, family member, professional. Just get someone who's done it, because doing it yourself, such a false economy.
Good advice. Fitzy, really good to have you in.
Thank you, Leigh.
My only regret is that we couldn't talk for longer.
We'll do another episode later.
Yeah, we should do. All right, mate. Cheers.
Thank you,
good
Leigh.
to see you.